Okay, well this tutorial is going to be looking at opening RAW files and making just some basic corrections to them. So if we go ahead to open, now we can see there's a whole range of documents here. Now some of these are JPEG files and some of these are camera RAW files. And the difference between the two types of files is that the RAW file contains all the raw data from the image directly from the camera as it was captured, whereas a JPEG file is a compressed file where they do all sorts of calculations to make the file size a lot smaller, and in doing so you lose a bit of detail out of the image, whereas with the camera RAW file it contains the full amount of detail. So if you're going to do any type of editing, it is better to edit with the camera RAW file rather than a JPEG version of the file. So let's go ahead and open a document here. And you can see that it opens in a new window, and this is where we make adjustments to this RAW file before we actually use it in Photoshop. And what you'll see here are a range of things that you can actually work with. There's lens correction, some color adjustments, a bit of sharpening and noise reduction, a tonal curve. But this first one here is probably the main one that that you should be looking at using. And as you get a bit more confident, you can start playing with some of these other settings. Now you'll see that you can zoom in to see the details in the image. If we select the hand here, it means we can move it around. And there's a range of other things here, but that's probably the main two that you can work with here, the zoom and the hand. Now we'll zoom back out. Okay, so the first thing to notice with this image then is that it just doesn't look right in terms of the colour. The colour's got quite a pinkish tinge to it. So that means that it wasn't shot with the correct white balance. So that'd be the first correction that you'd make. And we see the white balance over here on this side. Now there's two sliders that you can work with. You've got a blue-yellow, which just adds or subtracts the blue and the yellow elements to the image, and then you've got a green and magenta slider. So if you want to do it manually, you can select those two or use those two sliders to find the right color, but there's also some presets here. So if you wanted to shoot in daylight, or if it was a shady day or whatever, that's what you'd be looking at. But this shot here was obviously shot inside, so you'd be looking at these three here would be your indoor use, either a tungsten or a fluorescent. But a tungsten looks obviously too blue. More likely it was fluorescent lighting, and you can see that's probably the closest match. And then you can just tweak it with these ones here. It's probably still a little bit too much magenta. So if we have a look here, we can preview. This is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. So a bit more. And if you think that's a bit too blue, you can take a bit of the blue out as well. The next one to look at then is the exposure, because if you look at the image, it is a bit dark. We could probably afford to make it a little bit brighter. We'll probably go all the way up to about there, something like that. And you could slide it down. If the image was too bright, you could slide it down to about -1 as well. I wouldn't go too much beyond +1 or -1, but it really just depends on the detail in the picture. You can also play around with the brightness here, brightness and contrast. If we have a look at a preview, That was before, and that's what it looks like now. So there you've almost got the image. You could probably even open the image just with those settings there. If you wanted to do something a little bit more advanced, if you wanted to have a play with some of the other features, this would be the next one I'd recommend trying. This is the tonal curve, and what you have here is, along this graph, just shows how much of the area, or sorry, how much of the image is light and how much of it is dark. So this side of the graph is the dark parts of the image, and this side is the light parts of the image. And if we adjust these different points, we can actually make the image lighter and darker. So if we look at this side of the image here, this is working with the lighter elements of the image, and you can see the white wall there. We can make it brighter, or we can make it darker. If you want to add a little bit of, or make a bit more contrast in your image, you make the lighter parts lighter and the darker parts a bit darker. So if we look down here, this makes the darker elements of the image just that little bit darker. And if you don't want to work with this 4 points here, I find that a bit annoying sometimes. I just use 3. So you just drag it and drag it off. And if you want to make a new point, just drag it there, and that creates a new one. So you can see, if you wanted to make the darker parts of the image brighter, you bring it above the line there. If you want to make the darker elements darker, you bring it below. And then this middle curve here is those sort of midpoints, or those mid-tones. You can either make them lighter or darker. Purely up to you what you like in terms of your image, but to make a slightly higher contrast image, your curve will end up looking something like this, where you make the top part of it go higher and the bottom part lower. And that's probably about as much as you would need to do there. Now you could also play around with some of these other settings if you wanted to, sharpening and noise reduction, as well as the colours that are in the image. And then this one here is also quite handy, the lens correction, because every lens has some flaws to it, and Photoshop is able to make some corrections based on that. So if we look, this lens here was a Sigma lens that I used, and based on the profile of that lens, it's made a number of corrections to it, and you can see the difference here if we click this one on. And that's just taking out some barrel distortion in the image, just to sort of flatten the image a bit more. And you can also remove chromatic aberration, which is just some of the colour fringing between the light and dark elements of the lens. But that's probably as much as you would need to look at fixing. You might want to look at noise reduction. I think this one was shot at quite a high ISO 800. So if we have a look at the image, we can see there's quite a lot of sort of grain in the image here. And we can try taking out some of it. You can see the effect that it has there. So this was before. If you have a look at this area here, looks quite grainy, and then after, just sort of smooths it out, takes out a bit of that noise that's in the colours. So again, a preview. Bit hard to see at a full, looking at the whole picture like this, but you could see in the detail there that it does have a slight effect. So that's probably about as much as you'd look at doing with the raw image. And as I said, it's better to to make these corrections with a raw image, because that's where all the details are captured directly from the camera, whereas a JPEG image is a compressed file with a lot of that data has been deleted. So the last thing to do then is just to open the image. And then it's ready for any other alterations you want to make. But as I said, it's best to use the raw images. You'll certainly get the best quality out of your images, and it's a lot easier to work with like that.